Coming up on this week's show, Kris Jacen is here talking about her debut novel, Wait for Me, and her journey from editor to author.
Welcome to the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, the show for readers and writers of gay romance fiction. If you can read it, write it, watch it, or listen to it, these two guys are going to talk about it. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Adams and Will Knaus.
Welcome to episode 118 of Jeff and Will's Big Gay Fiction Podcast. I'm Jeff from JeffAdamsWrites.com.
And I'm Will from WillKnaus.com. This week's episode is brought to you in part by listeners just like you. We'll have more information on how you can help support this show in just a few moments. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Another week, another show. I hope everyone out there listening, no matter where you are, I hope you are staying warm. The U.S. is a frozen tundra currently, and with the exception of us, I think we are the only place in the entire country that isn't frozen solid.
I think the West and Southwest is the only place that it's like...
It's a mess right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So how are you? How's this week?
I'm good. It was a pretty good week. Got back into the swing of things as the new year started.
Swing!
Our Dream Spun sequel to Hockey Player's Heart is almost done, first draft-wise.
Mm-hmm.
I had an amazing 17,000-word week, which I fully accredit to Dragon for letting me have a couple of days where I had 4,000-word plus days, and those have been abnormal for me, but I would love it if they were becoming perhaps the new normal. Mm-hmm. Would be nice. At least a couple days a week to kind of squeak those in there would be very cool. So guess what starts this week?
I don't know. What does start this week?
The Hockey Player's Heart blog tour.
Oh.
And associated fun things around the debut of this book. Starting January 10th, which is Wednesday, we will be doing Facebook Live each evening from our author page, and we'll put the link to that in the show notes. We haven't announced the times yet specifically for that, but that'll be coming up this week. Plus, on Friday, January 12th, the blog tour itself starts on the Hearts on Fire website. There's going to be giveaways and excerpts and all kinds of cool stuff going on, so we hope you'll join us along the way for this. Also, this very day as we record on Sunday, January 7th, our book hit number 5 on the Dream Spinner bestseller list. So congratulations, best-selling author, co-author, co-host.
Thank you.
I have never been this high up on the Dream Spinner list with a book that I've had solo, so I'm pretty excited that we have broken into that top row of the chart. So, yay, rah!
Yeah. So, for more information and to check out those videos on Facebook, all you have to do is search for authors Jeff and Will.
Yes, and that link directly to our page will be in our show notes as well. For sure. So this week we also have a trip planned now. Yay!
Yes, the words. I don't know. I was.
You were so geared up to say something.
Like, I've got something important to say. And then no. Okay, so we talked about actually last week about the first quarter of 2018 is mainly going to be wrapping up some author projects, and then we're going to be attempting a move here in California. But after that move, our year is starting to very slowly fill in. Last year, we pretty much said we're not going to do anything at all in 2018, but as
bits and pieces start to fill themselves in anyway.
As serendipity is wont to do, events are slowly starting to trickle into our schedule for the new year.
Yes.
And we will be appearing at the LA Times Festival of Books.
Yes. April 21st and 22nd. Takes place on the USD campus. As we understand it, this event is huge. We saw pictures of it last year because Dream Spinner was there with several other authors, and this year we will be part of the folks attending and hanging out in the Dream Spinner booth, as well as I'm sure we'll be wandering around checking out everything there is to see in this 2-day event. We'll talk about a lot more stuff that we'll be doing as we get closer to it, because we just kind of finalized this a day or two ago. So be on the lookout for more on that. And if you're going to the festival, we hope you'll stop by and say hi, because that'll be cool.
Yes.
Also, a quick note, in case you missed it earlier this week, our favorite bookstore, the Ripped Bodice, down in L.A., was heavily featured on CBS's sitcom Life in Pieces this week. I believe it was last season that Diane Wiest's character, Joan, was in a romance writing class. And she has written this book, and she was appearing at the Ripped Bodice to do a reading, which she had to kick her family out of because they were making her tense. You can see Life in Pieces streaming on CBS.com and on the CBS All Access app if you missed it. It was a delightful segment of the show, and it was nice to see the interior of the store. Last season, a very tiny sliver of their pink facade appeared on the show as the kids were out loose in LA on their own. And this year the show moved into the shop proper. It was very cool. So that's all the news for the week. Would you like to tell the good folks how they can support the show as we promised?
Of course, as always, you can help support this podcast with a monthly pledge through Patreon. For as little as 25 cents per episode. Your pledge helps pay for the costs of producing and distributing this podcast. And for fans who pledge at the silver and gold levels, you'll have the exclusive opportunity to ask questions of our upcoming guests. All patrons also have the option to have a personalized thank you sent directly from us to them. Now, any month that pledges cover our monthly production cost, we'll produce a special bonus episode, especially for our patrons. Now, you can get all the details on our Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com/BigGayFictionPodcast. That's patreon.com/BigGayFictionPodcast.
Your favorite new YA hero has arrived with Tracker Hacker by Jeff Adams, the first book in the Codename Winger series. At 16, Theo Reese is the youngest agent for tactical operational support. His way with computers makes him invaluable. He designs new gadgets, helps agents, including his parents, in the field, and works to keep the TOS network safe. But when a hacker breaches the system TOS uses to track agents, Theo is put to the test like never before. Thrust from behind the safety of his desk, Theo must go into the field to put a stop to the hack. He's scared, but resolved because one of the missing agents is his father. And just to make it more interesting, he has to keep everything a secret from his boyfriend and teammates. Can Theo get the job done, save his dad, and make things good with his boyfriend? Find out in Tracker Hacker by Jeff Adams, available in ebook and paperback from Harmony Ink Press, Amazon.com, and other online retailers.
So, aside from writing all the words last week, you are also reading all of the words and listening to them as well. So please fill our listeners in.
Cool, yes. I started off the week reading Shelter the Sea by Heidi Cullinan, and once again did the audiobook, which is read by Iggy Toma. For this book, it's the second book in the Roosevelt series, so the sequel to Carry the Ocean. Emmett and Jeremy are back. Slightly, just a little bit of time has passed since we left them in the first book. Emmett is considering a proposal to Jeremy to marry him and is trying to figure out how to make that awesome. But they're also left with the knowledge that the Roosevelt is having some financial issues, keeping the doors open because it's not a cheap facility to keep running. And they also know that there are several bills in the Iowa State House that want to more privatize and make less safe the mental health organizations. And so Emmett and Jeremy, along with their friend David and friend Darren, who we met a little bit in the first book, take up the cause of helping to reform the mental health system in Iowa. It's truly an amazing story. We get even more in-depth look here at how the mental health organizations work, why they do what they do, some of the pitfalls that are well known in them, that often these folks are kind of the cast-outs from society because nobody really knows what to do with them. It's funny, it's heartbreaking. I think I spent the last 35 to 40 minutes of the book crying along with it, but it's as incredible as Carry the Ocean was, and it might actually be a touch better. Emmett and Jeremy are extraordinary characters. Their friends are extraordinary, and I don't want to say it's an overly political book, but you certainly get a look at how some of this stuff goes down and how bills are passed and how there are sleazy people out there gaming the system against people who actually need help, or occasionally gaming it against the will of the people. So a timely book to read, too, in the political climate that we're in. Mm-hmm. But do not let that scare you away from just the wonderful continued romance of Emmett and Jeremy and the truly wonderful things that they're doing in their lives to make their lives and the lives of others better. I can't recommend enough both Carry the Ocean and Shelter the Sea because they're amazing. And once again, Iggy Toma does an extraordinary job voicing not only Emmett and Jeremy, but now Darren has a larger role here as well. He is also on the autism scale. He does not tend to speak at all. He either signs or he uses his iPad to have it speak for him. He wrote his own little program to make the iPad do that, which is pretty cool and gives you an idea of how smart he is, even though he can't speak. So pick up this book if you haven't, because I know I'm late to the party with these books. So yeah, check that out. Also, because I've been reading a lot of authors who've been out there for a long time that have just not been authors I've been reading for some reason, I picked up Jordan Castillo Price's first book in the PsyCop series, which is called Among the Living. I also did this on audio, and it's read by Gomez Pugh. In this story, we're introduced to Victor Bain, who is he's the psychic half of a partnership. He sees dead people. This is his thing. He sees dead people, and he uses the dead people around, whether it's the victim themselves or perhaps dead people who witnessed a crime, to get information about crimes that have been committed. His new partner is Jacob Marks. His former partner had just retired after decades on the force, and now he's got Jacob. And we see how it works when you have what they call a stiff, which is a non-psychic, working with a psychic. It reminded me a lot of Charlie Cochet's Thirds, where you had the shifter working with the non-shifter to go out and solve these cases. Mm-hmm. In this case, they're actually looking at a paranormal case, which is not something they always do, because there's a succubus out there who is taking the form of whatever male you most desire and then luring you to bed and sucking out your soul. And, that's not really good for you when that happens. And so they're on that case while also at the same time forming a relationship between themselves. I thought this was delightful. I'm so glad that I picked up one of these books, and much like Thirds, I think I'll be coming back to the PsyCop series because it was a lot of fun. It was well written. It was the chemistry that developed between Victor and Jacob was great. I also like the supporting characters of some of the other Psys that we met along the way. So yeah, I'm excited that I continued to pick up something that I should have picked up a while ago. Yeah, so there are my two books, Shelter the Sea and PsyCop #1.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, just sort of expanding on something I spoke about last week, I mentioned that I read Logical Family by Armistead Maupin. And in this past week, The Untold Tales of Armistead Maupin, the documentary about the author, aired on PBS. We watched it. Mm-hmm. We loved it. It was remarkable. I think the documentary and the book sort of dovetail nicely together. I think they work well as a complete package. If you're interested in watching The Untold Tales of Armistead Maupin, it is currently streaming on pbs.com. Plus, the DVD is also available, and it can be streamed on Amazon.
Yes, we'll put all the good links to that in the show notes. I enjoyed the documentary. I haven't read the book yet, but I plan to. It was good to see these insights. There's interviews from Laura Linney and Olympia Dukakis. Lots of talk about getting Tales off the City off the ground. Some of what you talked about from the book kind of connected into that show, especially around Rock Hudson and stuff. So I'm very glad we got to watch it.
Yeah, good stuff.
Want to hang out with us between shows? Check us out on Facebook. You never know what we might post. news about book sales, bonus video content, and maybe even a live broadcast or two. Like us today at facebook.com/biggayfictionpodcast and see what we get up to next.
So recently I had the opportunity to speak with Kris Jacen. Kris is an editor at MLR Press and is also now a debut author with the book that I reviewed a few weeks back called Wait For Me, which I really enjoyed this look at a military relationship with a soldier who's actively deployed and kind of what that means to the relationship in general. It was great talking to Kris, and she'll tell us about that book, the sequel to the book, which is coming out in February, and what it was like making the switch over from editor to author. Today I'm welcoming Kris Jacen to the podcast. Kris met her soldier in high school, but didn't marry him until almost 10 years later. She moved around with him and their daughters, born in 2 different states, thanks to the Army, for the first 19 years of their marriage before settling in Western New York. Since 2008, she's been an editor-in-chief and formatting director for Man Love Romance Press, also known as MLR, and its imprints since. She also acts as editor, mentor, and sounding board for newcomers, which lets her pay it forward and help authors realize their dreams. This past November, she made her debut as an author with Wait For Me. Welcome, Kris.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So a few weeks ago on the podcast, I talked about Wait For Me, and I just loved this story. It was so good. And it's so awesome seeing you make your debut. Tell our listeners what Wait For Me is about.
Well, Wait For Me is a story about Jeff McNamara, Mackey, and Scott Ash, who is a child care director. Jeff has been in the Army for 18, 19 years at this point, and he has a really close group of friends that they call themselves the Heptad, and they, one of them is getting married, and he's at the bachelor party and meets Scott, and needs a +1 for the wedding, and he asks Scott to save him from matchmaking. And from there, they get together, and but Jeff's being deployed within 6 weeks of them meeting, so a lot of their relationship is while he's deployed. So it's through emails and Skypes and R&R in the middle of it. And then they get together at the end with a little bit of PTSD thrown in there.
What was your inspiration behind the book?
Well, I have always had a lot of plot bunnies show up to me. And I've always been able to feed them off to other authors, whether it's an author I work with or someone that I knew that the story would fit, and I would kind of like feed them the plot bunny. Because I really, if you had asked me even a year ago today, I was an editor. I had no interest in being an author at all. But this plot buddy just showed up and wanted to be told and wouldn't let me feed them away. So I guess the inspiration was there's not a lot out there about what the one left behind with the military goes through. And I have a little bit of experience with that. So I wanted to show that part of the relationship building and how do you face, wait a minute, I'm sending, my soldier off to war, into a war zone. Not that we've declared war, but to a war zone where they could get shot at or blown up. Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with that? It takes a strain. I used to teach classes for the military, and one of the classes was all about, being a military wife and whatever. And one of them was, one of the slides that we used to use had the 7 traits of a military spouse. And there used to be an 8th trait, and the 8th trait was my favorite trait, which they made us get rid of, which was a little bit soft in the head. Because when you're looking at what you have to go through, it takes a certain person to be able to do that. And to be able to show what you have to go through when you're the one behind was the inspiration behind it.
How much of your own experience with your own military life kind of draws back into the book?
There's quite a bit because my husband's last deployment to Iraq, I was the family readiness coordinator or leader. which basically meant, because he was the first sergeant, I was in charge of all the wives left behind. And at that point, it was only wives. There were no gay spouses in the unit. So when they left, I was responsible for 68 spouses and 82 children. And when they came back, we had 79 spouses and 97 children. So a lot of that, like the redeployment ceremony is in there. I did make up the wedding scene, so that is not from any wedding that I have been to. But there are little parts, like at the reception when Mackie is giving his best man toast. He talks about the table that is off to the side that no one will sit at, which is at every military function that you go to. They talk about the table that's set to the side for those that can't be with us. So that part is from an actual military ceremony.
Mm-hmm. I was fascinated too. Actually, before I go there, I had no idea that someone could be responsible like that for all of the wives and children. That's hinted at a little bit, that there's talk of the person who is the contact still on base if something happens to the folks who are deployed, right. But that it is that broad of a group of people you'd be responsible for.
It is. What was kind of interesting when we did it is my husband deployed with the 25th Infantry Division Artillery last time. They're in Hawaii. So half of our spouses were on the mainland and half of them were on the island. So it was kind of interesting to deal with that dynamic also. Sure,
yeah, because not everybody's right there where you can see them and physically be present for them. The heptad I found fascinating in this book, and how there's that close camaraderie and I have your back, and it's you see it a lot with police books where there's the partners and that kind of book, but this really broadened that out. Is that also based on something that you've seen, or was that kind of a made up element as well?
Actually, it's kind of a little bit of half and half. My husband has a best friend that he went through basic with, and he went through first airborne with, and he's actually one of our children's godfathers. So there is that kind of element that they reform those, if you look at, say, the movie Band of Brothers, where if you've read the book or seen the miniseries, you see how they make those connections and they're there for each other. And that is factual. There are so many that they make that connection and here you go. I was just talking with my secretary the other day at my day job, and we were talking about Christmas cards, and she was like, yeah, I send out like about 60. She's like, how many do you send out? I'm like, about 40. And she's like, what? I'm like, because we still have these friends that are in North Carolina and Washington State and Mississippi and Louisiana and California, and they're still so far broad wide that we still keep in touch. So that is really a factual part of what I've saw in as a military spouse. So
I think it's awesome how you've kind of brought this to people who may not know what that all means. I mean, for me, even though I've read some romances that are based with somebody in the military or coming out of the military or something, I've never seen one that framed so much of it like this, and yet still managed to have the romance as the driving part of everything. You really made a nice balance there.
Well, thank you. I tried to make that balance, and I was really good when I was working with my main beta reader, my friend Jen, who is awesome. I always feel bad when I say who she is because I feel like I'm dropping names, but she is, my friend Jen is JL Langley. So, and she was my main beta reader for the story. She would read the scenes as I went. And I was like, well, am I dropping too much? Is there too much military information? And she was like, no, there's not. I was like, is it an info drop? She's like, no, you've got a nice balance going on. And so I did, and I did the one thing that I tell all authors that when I'm working with them, don't read reviews. Reviews aren't for you. And I actually read one that they were like, well, it's kind of like they dropped this and there's this instant and there's this. And then, wait a minute, they're in the Army, but then there's Stetsons. And I'm like, okay, obviously you have no clue about what's going on and you missed it, because my husband has a Stetson from being in the Army. The cavalry, which is, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. There's they used to be on horses. Now they're mechanized. They're either in a helicopter or on a Humvee, and they still hold up those traditions of, you go on your spur ride and you earn your spurs and you earn your Stetson. And once a week, they're in their BDUs and boots, or their ACUs and boots, and they have Stetsons on the bottom of their boots, and not Stetsons, their spurs are on the bottom of their boots, and they're wearing their helmet, their Stetsons and stuff. So it's part of the military. So it was I was like, okay, maybe I didn't get that across, but I guess everyone can't get it.
It's interesting you point out that review, because I've seen that review too, and it was after I read the book, and I'm like, did they read the same book I did? I don't know.
Yeah, and I was like, because I was on actually Amazon for something else, and I saw that, and I was like, oh, I have some more reviews. I wonder, because I actually really haven't gotten a lot of feedback from readers or reviewers or such, that I know people have read it because they've told me, but I was like, well, what are people thinking? And I read it, and I was like, okay, I obviously didn't put something across, maybe. Oh, well, it can't be for everyone.
Exactly. And don't read reviews. You shouldn't.
I know I should. I tell all my authors, don't. Especially when I'm working with new authors. That's one, if I had to give them, one piece of advice is reviews aren't for you. Reviews are for readers to get, what's out there, what's there. It's not feedback for you. And don't read them.
Yeah, exactly. Because it could hurt you one way or the other.
It could definitely hurt you.
So what inspired you to finally make this transition from editor to author? Because I've certainly heard you say more than once that you really didn't ever see yourself as an author.
I think it was back to the plot bunny. Jeff did not want to go away. He wanted me to tell his story, which was very strange for me. I'm very used to my friends' characters coming and telling me things, and I think it's a nod to how well I work with them, because I know their characters just as well as they do. And it's been very strange when I'll be like, hey, wait a minute, your character, Joe Schmo came and this is what he told me. And the author goes, yeah, actually, I can see that. And that actually would fit into the next scene that I'm writing or whatever. So, but this one, Mackie showed up for me, sitting at the bar saying this frickin' sucks, because, he's watching another one of his best friends, still trying to find his one. And he wanted his one, and he wanted me to give it to him. So I think that was the one thing but it wasn't like I got the plot bunny and it was then done. I wrote the first 2 or 3 scenes, and then I didn't write anything else for 2-3 months maybe. But then it was like, okay, you got to finish it. I showed it to Laura Bomba, who owns MLR, and Jen, JL, and they were both like, where's the rest of this? Laura's response was, so when are we releasing it?
Let me pencil you in on the schedule over here.
Well, see here, I do the schedule.
Oh.
So she's like, where are we putting you? So I think that was kind of the inspiration for the jump. Was it, I said, oh, I'm going to write. No, it was more of the character wanted his story told, and he wouldn't let me feed him to anyone else.
I was about to ask, what made this one that wasn't going to another author?
I think what it was I knew how much of the military needed to be in the story, and how much what Scott was going through, the love interest, and what he would have to look at as his challenges, and could he actually accept what he was going to have to do as a military spouse. which is, there's a lot that most people don't realize. And I think that was part of what I wanted to be able to tell out there.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't mentioned yet the wonderful canine companion that is in this story
Dix.
also.
I love Dix.
Dix was so heartwarming just across the board. And I assume you've had real interactions with retired service dogs too.
I have had some interaction with retired military working dogs. I think right now I have 2 dogs, and if I brought more into the house, my husband would probably shoot me. He likes, 2's about his max right now. So, but I think at one point I would like to try to get a retired working dog, because they go through so much that what are you going to do with them when they're done? They only have, a short period where they can actually serve, or unfortunately they get hurt while doing their job. And there's enough that they can still do once they're out, that they're just amazing creatures that help us so much.
Yeah, it was very cool to see Dix weave his way into the story as well.
Mm-hmm.
What was the toughest thing for you to make that transition to author?
I think, and I'm still struggling with it, is promo, which is something that a lot of authors struggle with, and how to get your name out there. But it's a little different for me because I'm already out there as an editor, and people know me as the editor for MLR, and I worked with Wild City for a while, and so I'm known as the editor. And now people are trying to make the transition of, wait a minute, she also writes now. So that's a little bit of that's, I think, what is my struggle. I didn't really struggle with the editing process, because as I asked the senior editor for MLR's imprint, Passion and Print, to be my editor, because I work so much on a daily, weekly basis with the MLR editors. I didn't want to put the pressure on one of them to say, hey, here, you're editing your boss now. Because I kind of know that because I am Laura's editor. So Gail, who, yes, is she on my editing staff? Yes. But she's more autonomous. So she asked, and when she got it, she was like, this is really clean. There's not a lot here. And I was like, well, I think when you're working with, a beta reader like I was, plus all my editing experience, that it was kind of a self-editing process as I went through it. So there weren't a lot of hiccups when I went to that point.
What was the best thing about your author transition?
I think it's hearing from some that they've learned something from the book, something that they didn't realize before about the military or what a military spouse goes through or such. So I think that's been the best since I've been an author.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, because that is, getting that kind of feedback is always good.
Yes, it is. And they're not, and because it's a subject that there's not a lot of books out there about it. Like there's a lot of books with military and, there's like Kendall McKenna's Strength of the Pack and Strength of the Mate and Strength of the Wolf, where they're learning about, they're set in military, but there's not a lot about that one that's left behind in those books. And I thought that this was something that I could definitely bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that the editing process wasn't too difficult. You had somebody who wasn't directly on your staff necessarily, who was a little bit autonomous, and it was a clean manuscript. Did anything surprise you going through the editing process yourself as opposed to being on the other side of the desk?
I think because I'm so used to, I take my manuscript that I've edited and I send it to a line editor for when I'm working with an author. And then it comes back from the line editor. I go through it and clean it up, and then I send it to the author. I didn't have that in there because Gail did her edits, and then sent it back to me, and then she was done. I sent it to the line editor. I sent it to the proofreader. So I was getting that back, and then I was thinking, okay, commas, and I'm always about everyone's about commas. What is it? Z.A. Maxfield says she uses them like litter. You can't have enough. You just spread them everywhere, and they'll clean up somehow. So I think that might have been it.
I love that commas, even for you, who is the editor, is the problem.
They weren't really that much of a problem, so I was kind of surprised that they weren't more of a problem for me.
Because commas for me, I'm like, if I had to pay an editor by the number of times they move my commas, I would go broke.
Yeah. Everyone, commas and semicolons are the two that, yes, semicolon, you can use semicolons and they're a legitimate form of punctuation, but don't use them in dialogue. In dialogue, they don't necessarily work.
That's very true. Some of my earliest stuff, because Will's always my beta for my stuff before it gets out. He broke me a long time ago because he's like, do not give me semicolons in dialogue ever, and preferably nowhere. So
yeah, they're the one. I always caution authors that when you're using punctuation, whether it's a comma, semicolon, exclamation point, whatever it is, use them sparingly, because they can get overused and then lose their effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of advice to authors, and in this case, let's talk aspiring authors, those folks out there who are like, I get these plot bunnies and I don't know what to do with them. Mm-hmm. Now that you've taken one of your plot bunnies and gone off and done it, what's your advice to other people who are like, I'm not a writer. I've just got these plot bunnies, but I'm not a writer.
I would say probably take your time with it and listen to what the characters are telling you. Because as I've told authors, I can't even tell how many times I've said it. Once you get the story down on a piece of paper, I can teach you grammar. I can teach you where to put that comma. But I can't tell you how to make the characters interesting. That's something I can't teach you. I can't teach you how to put the spark in the story. That's something that comes from inside of you. So I would say more worry about how the story develops, how your characters develop, because then you can find a beta reader or an editor that can teach you the grammar and how not to have a run-on sentence. So I think that's my main is, it's always you hear people say, write, and what can you do more to learn your craft more? Write. Mm-hmm. So until you take that step and put your fingers to the keyboard or pen to paper, I can't edit a blank page.
Right.
I can, So I think that would be my main. And on over the years, 10 years now, it kind of shocks me when I think about it. But January is my 10-year anniversary with MLR.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I started in January of 2008 when my husband was deployed to Iraq. So, but I've written a lot of blogs over the past 10 years. I didn't realize how many until I moved them onto my website. So there's things there from pet peeves to, I wrote one time, and I had just read a book by J.R. Ward about, and in the story she had it was called The In-Between, where it was the land between when you were alive or whether you were dead. And her character was in the in-between. And I actually took that and wrote a blog about the in-between, which is not a no and not a yes, but a revise and resub. Mm-hmm. So all of those blogs are now on my website, so people can go back and read them. And there's things about how to behave at a con. Goodness gracious, people. Or swag, to swag or not to swag. What do you use for swag? And, do I have to spend thousands of dollars on it and stuff like that? So, no, you don't. You don't. One good piece of swag that readers can connect with you in your series, you're golden.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true.
All of that stuff. So all of the advice that I've given over the past 10 years, in the form of blogs is over there, so people can go read it if they so choose.
That'll be an amazing resource for folks who are, especially for folks who are coming into it, perhaps inspired by you to finally put pen to paper and take a chance with one of those plot bunnies.
Yeah, they can.
What was your overall process for the writing? Did you plot it? Did you pants it? Did you go in between?
I was in between. I had a list of points that I wanted to make sure were in and where they needed to go, or not where they needed to go, but what I thought needed to be in the story to hit the points that really kind of needed to be, because at the time, at the beginning of the story, Scott has barely any interaction with the military, has never really been friends with anyone in the military or married to the military. So he really didn't know what was going on. And so I had a list of things that I knew needed to happen for him to get that knowledge. And, things like I really wanted to make the wedding scene really impacted. And show that, maybe getting the first attraction of the guy in the really cool uniform, as the starting point isn't that bad. And then to go from that of, okay, wait a minute, he's caught my interest now. Wait a minute, there's more to this that I need to know beforehand. So I did have a slight outline, a slight list. I didn't really have an outline. I didn't have, in chapter 15, this needs to happen. But I did have a list of bullet points, I guess, is the best to say. And then I went from there. And I had shared my bullet points with Jen. And when I thought I was done, I was like, I'm done. Here you go. And she went back and she goes, wait. Where did this one go? Because I really think you need this one point to go back in. And I was like, fine. And I went back and I twisted it in and got that in there. But so I'm not a pantser, and I'm not an outliner, but I have bullet points that I need to hit.
Mm-hmm. I think most people kind of fall in that in between somewhere. Because otherwise you just kind of outline yourself to death.
Yeah, you can, and there are some that I know that really need to have those in-depth outlines, and it can work. It can work when you take your outline and then you just start fleshing out your outline can work. So that's one way that I know some do it.
And what's coming up next for you as an author?
My next book will be out in February.
Fantastic.
And so February, yes, and it's called Explore with Me. And it brings back two characters from Wait For Me. We get to see Danny, who is one of the Heptad, and Liam, who is Jeff McNamara's brother. And they kind of meet in New Orleans in the lead up to Mardi Gras. Liam is an emergency room doctor, and Danny ends up in his ER, and it goes from there.
Ends up in the ER. That's a tease right there.
He ends up in the ER after falling off the balcony at Lafitte's.
Oh, dear. Well, I'm looking very forward to that. When does that go on pre-order?
If I get off my butt and finish writing it, it should be on pre-order towards the end of January.
Fantastic. We'll have to prompt people to that, and I'll certainly be looking forward to it because I want to see the next of these adventures.
The next one? Yep, the next one.
How much of a series do you think this is going to be? Are you planned to be on the second book?
I think there's going to be at least one more after Explore with Me.
Cool. Trilogies are always good.
Yeah, I think that I don't really see it going past a trilogy at this point. But you never know who's going to show up in the stories, in the books, and need their story.
Exactly. Very cool.
That's what I'm looking at this point.
And where can people connect with you online to keep up with everything?
I am very active on Facebook. So find me on Facebook, Kris Jacen. I am very, very bad at Twitter, but I am on Twitter at Kris Jacen. I suck at remembering to tweet. I do. I'm more apt to go on Facebook and put like a 2-line post on Facebook than I am to remember to tweet it. And then I do have my website, which is www.krisjacen.com, and Jason is Jacen, Kris with a K. And then I'm always around MLR or email.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We'll link up to all those, plus give people the link to Wait For Me so they can go pick that up. Put all that in our show notes.
Okay.
Kris, thank you so much for joining us, and best of success on Wait For Me and the sequel.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thanks to Kris for joining us here on the show. The sequel that she spoke about, Explore With Me, comes out on February 9th.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm looking forward to reading that one. As we heard in the interview, we got a little tiny sneak peek of what is coming in that book. And as soon as I can get the pre-order, I'm going to be clicking on that and get it straight away.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that'll do it for this week's episode. Coming up in episode 119, that's next week, Christina from Christina's Bookshelf will be here, and she'll have some book recommendations for the new year.
Yeah, she's got some good stuff planned.
Cool. Okay, guys, remember, no matter where life takes you, the journey will always be sweeter when you have a book. Until next time, guys, keep turning those pages and keep reading.
For detailed show notes and the complete episode backlist, go to biggayfictionpodcast.com. New episodes are available every Monday on all major podcast distributors and YouTube. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.